Hello, everybody. Good morning. Well, I'm for sure wanting you not to go. Please don't go. Good morning, everybody. This is Lowell White, your host of 360 Performance Talk. You're listening to KUHSdenver.com at 11 a.m. on a Friday, every Friday. Hi, my Facebook friends. Good to see you. Let's straighten up the picture. There we go. And we're going to talk a lot about brain trauma or traumatic brain injury, TBI. It's constant. It's going to be an every year kind of addressment for me as we swing around through the sports. Last week we talked about camps, summer camps, and interestingly enough, when we discuss brain trauma, we're going to talk about the signs and preventions of that, and we're going to focus on this book right here, Concussions and Our Kids by Robert Cantu, Dr. Robert Cantu, co-authored with Mark Hyman. I met Dr. Cantu a couple of years ago when I was at a sports turf and field seminar right here in Boulder, actually. So we're going to talk about that, but more from a practical standpoint. Because last week when we were talking about camps, the NFL had come out with some statements about summer camps and what they were doing with USA football, because they're going to talk about equipment, proper techniques, and things that kids need to know in order to perform in ways that are performance of excellence at high levels, but at the same time with safety, thinking about where am I at on the field, really, using the brain to protect the brain. So we're going to talk about those samples of examples from that and the book that Dr. Cantu wrote. We're going to talk about the myths as well. What you should know that it's out there. Maybe it's a preventative device. Maybe it's a headband or some type of liner for your helmet. And we're going to debunk those myths so that you don't get caught up into spending too much money with that kind of equipment. And also talking about what activities have the greatest chance of a brain trauma, whether it's traumatic or not. Just some form of brain injury that alters your pattern of thinking, alters your ability to stay alert and function in a normal, if not excelled capacity. And interestingly enough, the things that are on the top of the list may not be something you anticipate. So that's what we're going to talk about today. That's on the show today with 360 Performance Talk right here at KUHSdenver.com. And I'm your host, Lowell Whiteman. So let's start off with some of those. As we talk about our show every week, the first segment is on mindset. We're talking about traumatic brain injury and brain trauma. And so within our mindset segment, we're going to talk about proper techniques, whether it's tackling, a header in soccer, a body position and proper, because there's going to be contact in sports. Like volleyball, there's going to be contact in sports. There's tall, long, strong bodies jumping and moving and digging for a volleyball. So we're going to talk about that sport as well. But interestingly enough, some of the sources of brain trauma, like I said, traumatic or not, aren't necessarily from sports. And here's the first headline, right here in my hot little hand. We're going to talk about the sources of concussions in high school sports. And interestingly enough, here it is, female soccer players suffer the most concussions in high school sports. Now, when I first heard about that, and I also heard about some young ladies that will never play soccer again. In fact, in some cases, will never be around any form of contact, aggressive contact in a sport or an activity, or they risk not only more severe brain injury, but perhaps fatal, life-ending brain injury. So here's what it says. On March 14th in 2017, out of San Diego, California, high school girls have a significantly higher concussion rate than boys, with female soccer players suffering the most concussions, according to new research presented in 2017's annual meeting of the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons. Now, it goes on to say, while American football has been both scientifically and this word always gets me, coincidentally associated. So it's coincidentally, it's a conjunction with associated with the highest concussion rates. Our study found that girls, and especially those who play soccer, may face a higher risk, according to Wellington Hsu, MD and professor of orthopedic surgery at Northwestern University, the Feinberg School of Medicine in Chicago. He's one of the lead authors and researchers in this study. The new knowledge presented in this study can lead to policy and prevention measures to potentially halt these trends. Now, one of those discussions that's happening with not just females in soccer, but just soccer in general, is when is the proper time to introduce headers? Now, one of the guidelines that people are talking about is no headers in soccer, male or female, from age 14 and under. Whether you want to use the developmental rationale, they're developing young bodies, they're not quite as physically capable. Now they're able to do headers, they're able to learn the techniques of the headers, but head, neck, shoulders, chest area is not developed enough, and in that lack of development, able to bring on the muscle and structural strength to avoid brain trauma. Also remember, when we talk about brain trauma, where does brain trauma occur? Is it just from the front when you get popped in the head from the front, like with a header, you're using the forehead and your head is tilted up a little bit, or football or any? Well, brain trauma, anything from the neck up, because you can get brain trauma through twisted motion of your neck. There are football players that don't even get hit. They just fall down. I've fallen and can't get up kind of thing. They've just fallen down. And because they're running at such a speed that the contact with the surface and their body creates such a whipping effect that they get brain trauma. It's brain stem trauma that then moves up into symptomatic problems with their behavior from there on out. Now, continuing with this study, is a complementary study from the Washington Post. It says that concussions has steadily risen over the past decade as an increasingly increasingly prevalent injury in high school sports. The American Academy, again, of Orthopedic Surgeons found girls soccer players suffered concussions at a significantly higher rate than football players and boys in match sports. So that means boys in soccer aren't getting as high a rate of concussions as girls. Now, I'm not going to get into the science of the anatomy, but there's anatomical differences beyond the obvious, okay, people? Stay with me here. Let's stay scientific and not gutter. Girls have longer torsos, which creates a fulcrum at the hips that's got a little bit more whip action to it when they jump in the air for headers or they're maneuvering on the field. And if they do fall on many of the fields, they're not that soft. They don't provide the kind of cush that they need to help prevent unnecessary trauma to the brain and the body in general. But the numbers in 2005 for girls, 2006 was 15.2% of all injuries were head trauma related, brain trauma related. And then when we move to comparing football, that's American football, 2014 and 2015 to girls soccer in 2014 and 2015, we see that football was a 24, almost 25% increase in brain trauma injuries compared to girls, almost 35% increase in brain trauma. Now, here's my, not so much totally uneducated, but limited to the level of what these orthopedic surgeons are saying and their experience. But I know from a coach's perspective and watching athletes and talking to athletes on a weekly basis, and then realizing the anatomical difference in structural efforts. In fact, as you look over at the monitors, you'll see that there's a soccer match going on in our videos back there, and it's boys. And what I'm pointing out here is that girls have moving parts that create more power. Now remember, on the physics side of things, force is equal to acceleration times mass. So if you have like a 5'0" forward on your soccer team and she weighs barely 95 pounds, she's going to have to run really, really fast, accelerate, and run really fast, and then make contact to equal the same amount of force as someone a little bit more mass to them at perhaps less speed, to have greater or equal to or greater force. Now, that being said, what this means for coaches is you train your athletes on how to move and be aware of the field and the participants on the field to judge your speed effectively to what moves you want to create. You know, I used to say early in my career as a coach, I'd say, we need to have reckless abandon. Well, reckless abandon doesn't necessarily support good, healthy addressment to diminishing or preserving yourself on a brain trauma, you know, where you knock heads, where you survive from that and not be injured. So you want to, stay controlled, control emotions, control energy, so that you utilize that physics formula, force equals acceleration times mass, in your favor. Another example I ask kids to think about is, if you were going to get stepped on by something or someone, which would you rather pick? The foot of an elephant. Now think about that. An elephant, okay, big animal, very heavy animal, their big round foot. Or would you rather be stepped on by the stiletto heel of a woman's shoe? Which is going to create more of an injury for you? Well, from the physics, neither one is going to be nice, okay? But the elephant's foot distributes the force across a larger surface area versus the stiletto heel. It's one point on your hand, on your neck, on your whatever. It's going to hurt more and create more damage. The same thing is, the analogy then is, the force equals acceleration times mass. So if you got the heel of the shoe, that pointed heel of the shoe going fast, it's going to wreak some damage. Now, that is equated to the grill of a football player's helmet. It's been said that head first movement going forward into someone with the helmet is going to be more like the stiletto heel of a woman's shoe than it is the elephant. So there's proper technique. So as we talk about the mindset and knowing that the numbers are a little bit changed than what you might think, we think, well, football, football gets a lot of press. It's a very large money-making sport. It gets a lot of attention because of the injuries and the cases that have happened where young men have been crippled, paraplegic, quadriplegic, all very heartfelt, but the percentage of that happening to, in general, what causes brain injuries and TBI, traumatic brain injuries, and the case of someone being put in the hospital because of that, isn't necessarily all in the camp of football. So that being said, we need to be aware. We need to have our mindset thinking about the kind of contact we're going to create, and are we communicating techniques for kids to tackle properly at the right age, to do a header on a soccer ball, if it's in volleyball, properly getting after the ball to set it or dig it, or in the case of spiking it. If you're not going to make a play and the ball's coming right at you, protect your face because the one area in volleyball where a traumatic brain injury happens is when a ball is spiked and it makes contact with a defender on the other side of defender or offense, doesn't matter. But when the ball's coming over the net after a spike, it's coming at a very high speed towards your head, and that's going to cause the trauma to your brain. So let me give you a list here then. of what to consider. So when you're thinking about, I'm going to listen to Mr. Whiteman on the show, 360 Mindset and the 360 Performance Talk Show at KUHS Denver. Yeah, I understand, but I'm a pretty good athlete, or I'm a mom or a dad. I said, we trust our son or daughter. They're good at what they do. We watch them. We take care of them. Well, guess what? It may not be the sport, because here's the top source. The top source for traumatic brain injury, and this is the top 20 sports or recreational activities. The top one, cycling. 85,389 cases were reported in hospitals in 2009 related to cycling. Now, yes, the next one you can imagine, it's up there. It gets lots of publicity. It's football, American football. 46,948 cases were reported in hospitals in 2009. Now, remember, I just said to you in 2014 and 2015, brain injury related to football raised almost 25%. So that was 2009 I gave you. So just that number's going up. Now here's a surprise for you. I think it was a surprise for me. Baseball and softball included 38,394 cases reported at hospitals related to traumatic brain injury. Here's the next one. This is the, I'm going to give you the top fives. The fourth one is basketball. It doesn't say boys or girls, just says basketball. Almost the same amount as baseball and softball. So it was 34,692, almost 35,000 cases reported to hospitals and taken care of in 2009. Number 5, big category, water sports. That's interesting to me. Diving, well, that makes sense, right? Dive into shallow water and, something happens. Scuba diving. Surfing, swimming, water polo, ball, or you get somebody hits you because they're going after a ball. Water skiing and water tubing accounted for 28,716 brain trauma-related injuries reported to U.S. hospital emergencies in 2009. Just so you get a category, I'm not going to give you the numbers, but just so you know that recreational vehicles are on the list, the powered ones. Then you have soccer, skateboarding, there's winter sports, horseback riding, gymnastics, dance, cheerleading, and so on. This is interesting. Golf made the list. I find that really interesting. Golf made the list. And the last one on the list of the top 20 is ice skating. Ice is hard. You fall down. It doesn't say hockey. Hockey's above that. And it's the ice skating has half as many injuries of brain trauma than hockey does. And that would make sense. But what doesn't make sense to me is that golf had more injuries reported for brain trauma than hockey does. They're right after each other. It's hockey and then it's golf. So interesting statistics. Now, what makes those numbers even more interesting is when we get more specific about the numbers. And we look at ages, age range. Because this really makes it interesting to be concerned as a parent on the just living every day. And here's one of those from ages newborn all the way to greater than 65 years old. Motor vehicle related brain trauma injuries. There was 1,100 of them reported for 0 to 4-year-olds. Now I'm going to jump from there. That's the lowest. I'm going to jump from there to what age is it the highest for motor vehicle? It may be where you think. I'm going to give it two brackets, the 15 to 24 combined with the 25 to 44-year-olds. Almost 30,000 motor vehicle related brain trauma cases reported in 2010. And that's interesting to me, motor vehicle related. So really let's talk about seatbelts, make sure you have seatbelts on, make sure that they understand the rules of the road. Obviously you have to be a defensive driver, and you can't count on, you're not the only one on the road, so other people may influence what's going on. But motor vehicle related incidences that create brain trauma is the most frequent within our population, according to numbers gathered from 2006 to 2010. Now, what I'm telling you here is that I'm trying to take a little bit of the sting off of football. Football is a great game. Basketball is a great game. Soccer is a great game. Softball is a great game. They all have the potential, because they have contact periodically, to engage people at fairly high speeds with some mass that then creates a force that, when applied to the area of the neck or head, could create traumatic brain injury, or at least a brain trauma of some degree. Now, with this information, here's where I want to take it. I want to make sure that regardless of what you or your children or friends and family do, make sure that you're paying attention to the guidelines and rules of that particular activity, what you believe to be the right techniques to perform those activities. Those tend to be what in the literature is saying, and what Dr. Cantu is saying about prevention, that you do it right. Now, that doesn't necessarily, that's the athlete, that's you as an individual. It doesn't necessarily mean coaches are giving the proper training with brain injury involved. There's been a lot of discussion about tackling techniques, making sure that when you tackle, it's the, get properly squared up, see that player, wrap them, drive, so that it's your body that's taking that. Now, we're in our skills area right now of our segments, and in the skills area, I talk about breathing all the time. As it relates to the equation for force equals acceleration times mass, if you're the person that's going to deliver the hit, or you're going to deliver contact along the boards of the ice arena for hockey, or you're going to go up and make contact with that ball with your head as a soccer player, I'm going to ask you to train yourself to breathe in through your nose, and as you make that contact, breathe out, exhale. What that does is it centers the skeletal system and aligns it to proper alignment to joints, the bones, the joints, the connections. And as you exhale, it releases that and lets that force go and distribute throughout. Now, on the other side, similar but kind of somewhat in reverse, is you are going to be the one receiving the hit. So as you, like a running back is going to receive a hit, you've got the ball, you know when it's coming, you see it coming. You want to make sure that you breathe in, because when you breathe in, especially from in through the nose and set the gut, you've got a pretty solid target. And if you've got good physical conditioning, you've hit the weight room, you've done what you needed to do to be in shape and have that endurance, you set a good target. But the minute you get that contact, release the breath. Now, what that does is allow you to absorb that, the whole body absorb it, not just head, shoulders, neck, wherever you're being hit, but your whole body absorbs that and helps to diminish the impact of the force. You still got hit, and you may still feel it, but you're training yourself to know how to take a hit, how to take a fall. In my training in martial arts, we learn about that all the time, whether it's jiu-jitsu, tai chi, karate, taekwondo, whatever martial art it might be. We learn how to both deliver and receive power and absorb the power. Make the power your own as you're receiving it, and letting it disperse itself. Now, that doesn't mean to say you shouldn't be aware of other items of skill that helps you to skill not related to how I talk about skill about how to tackle, how to block, the running and receiving, when you run and you're receiving contact from somebody. All of those things will be helpful to you, diminishing the impact of the force on you. One example in physics is the axiom that says if a fast-moving vehicle is coming straight at you, and your goal is to take that fast-moving vehicle, let's say it's a train on a track, take it off the track, is it more effective to your goal to address it head-on? Because its force is coming straight at you, it's accelerated, it has large mass, so that's going to have a lot of force. What do you do to alter that force in a way that will knock it off its track? Well, in most cases, a glancing blow would be the course to move that force off of its line and redirect it, rather than trying to match it force for force, because you're going to have as high of acceleration or greater, depending on your mass, compared to that train. Now, obviously, if I'm standing on the middle of the track and there's a train coming, it's bigger than me. That's a given. But my example is, the physics says if you move to the side and glance it from the side, you don't have to use as much force to alter that acceleration and mass to another path. So knowing the physics of movement, the physics of your mass and the acceleration behind it will help you not only to properly tackle, properly do a header, move on the floor with the proper balance so that you stay upright, you don't fall down, and create a whiplash effect like many soccer players. Wide receivers do it. I know a number of wide receivers in the NFL that have had brain trauma because of they just got knocked off path and fell. They're going for a pass and they didn't catch it, and boom, they hit the ground and their neck goes chick, and it flips a couple times and they come up a little bit woozy. Nobody hit them. That's what happened. So that brings me back to my statistics. For children in the ages of 0 to 14, the greatest source of brain injury is falling. Equally, on the other end of the age spectrum, those that are from 45 to over 65, falling is the greatest source of brain trauma. In the data that was gathered between 2006 and 2010, it's in excess of 50,000 cases based on falling. That's really very, very interesting. Very interesting indeed. Now, that being said, all of this data that I have right here, this data is worthwhile. It gives us a pattern, a theme of indication about some direction, but it also is important to know there's a last column here on the outside, and it's labeled as unknown. So there were cases reported to the hospital for brain injury, whatever degree it might be. It might have been traumatic. It may have been some lesser degree of that, but unknown at all ages. What's most interesting to me is from the ages of 25 to 64, there's over 50,000 cases of unknown. The same thing is true for greater than 65 years old. Just in itself is over 50,000 cases reported. Now, as a performance coach, those numbers would tell me, are you watching what you're doing? Are you aware of your environment? Or are you just, walking and talking so fast that you turn and run right into a door jam? And boom, there's your first incident of brain trauma. I don't mean to make light of it, because it's very serious. These are things that as human beings, intelligent human beings, we should be aware of and aware of our surroundings. And we're right in that area right now in our third segment on mental conditioning, and segueing from skills to mental conditioning. Because mental conditioning is all about environment, knowing where you're at, so that you don't trip and fall. You don't turn too quickly and bump into a hard object, right, with your, using your face. That would be unfortunate. Be very unfortunate. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But let me just refer to Dr. Cantu's book and give you some symptoms of brain trauma. So in case you do, turn too quickly and run right into the door jam, you've got it all squared away as to what, if you feel something, what it means. You might have brain trauma. There's well, let me put it this way first. All concussions are accompanied by symptoms. So regardless of the degree of the concussion, the concussed state, they all have symptoms. And they fall into four major categories. There's a somatic category, emotional category, sleep disturbance category, and cognitive category. Somatic is basically what it means is there's something outwardly that's happening. The most obvious one is you vomit. That's the pretty quick one. You know, between plays, if after a play, and if a kid gets up out of a pile on the football field and they're throwing up through their face mask, pretty much think they got dinged in the head, or we would check it out. A lesser degree of that would be nausea. Those are somatic. A headache. So you combine headache, nausea, vomiting, and then balance problems, you pretty much know there's a degree of concussed state there. And when you add visual impairment with the balance issue, that for sure is part of it. What would continue afterwards, after you ask that player or participant to rest and relax, if dizziness spells comes back, if they have sensitivity to light or noise. Now, as I say this, the somatic symptoms have intersections with other signs related to cognitive and emotional states. In education, ADD, ADHD children have similar symptoms when they're in that more agitated, pronounced state of an episode with their ADHD or ADD. So is it's true for a person who has migraines, because they'll have a sensitivity to light. They may have a dizziness episode before it comes on. Usually with a severe ADD, ADHD or migraine situation for someone, their vomiting is the sign that it's over. Because once they vomit, well, everything gets clear. Their sensitivity to light goes away. Their sensitivity to noise goes away. Not necessarily true. So what I'm saying to you is, don't confuse after the fact, as you think that a player has had enough therapy and rest time, if they still display signs of dizziness, nausea, what have you, make sure that you're not dealing with a child or an individual that has learning issues. They have ADD or ADHD, or they may be a sufferer of migraines, because that could confuse you, and may not be a concussed state or the symptoms of concussion after the fact. Okay, so the emotional side of things with a concussion, or the higher degrees, traumatic brain injury, would be sadness to the point of depression, where there's emotional overtones. The dramatic side of that would be a suicidal side. A less dramatic degree of that would be just nervousness, mood changes, irritability, quick and snapping at people verbally with those emotional outbursts and that irritability. On the sleep disturbance side, that's almost self-defining, right? Sleep disturbance, it could be but more or less, not just more. So sleeping could be you're sleeping a lot or less, and the signal, though, in either of those cases is that there's difficulty getting to sleep because of the things that are going on, the pressures, the sensitivities they're feeling in their brain will cause them to be distracted and have a difficult time falling asleep. The last one, the fourth one, cognitive symptoms are, especially in college, where you have to get permissions and signed off sheets for instructors to understand why a student athlete's not appearing in class. You want to make sure that you notify those instructors and say, look, they're having difficulty concentrating and their have memory problems. So for them to go to class, especially if they have sensitivity to light still, they're dizzy, we're still dealing with some of those other symptoms, be aware that going to class isn't going to do them any good. It's going to be difficult for them. I want to thank everybody who's checking in with us this morning and seeing what we're doing. Michael Rackpo, hey dude. Houston, good to have you with me today. Brain injury, as you may know, my man, brain injury is part of the world of football. It's a violent sport, as it is for a lot of other sports. So the cognitive ones There's another one that this is hard to pick up on, and a lot of athletes, because they don't want to seem weak or frail and they want to get back in the game quickly, the cognitive area is the one area that coaches and people that the athlete trusts needs to be really investigated, because they'll try to cover up the fogginess, the mental slowdowns. They may seem superficially okay, but when you ask them, let's say, hey, take a look at the playbook. Give me your response, to these if-then questions. If we have this, what then would you do? If they're not able to quickly pop that answer back to you, that could be a sign that they're still kind of cognitively not quite there yet, or they're foggy in what do you want me to do? It could seem like it's a listening skill thing for them. So be aware that that area is the one area where the athlete, the participant who's been injured, is going to have a difficult time fessing up, and that you've got to be really sensitive to what's going on. Because look at, as I said in the numbers before, the unknowns. Why did you come in? Maybe it's because the unknowns, nobody was there to really reflect it, and okay, they've been continuing to act this way, I need to get them into the doctor, and you never really knew that they had a concussed state. There's, in Dr. Cantu's book, there are cases of female soccer players. In fact, let me just turn to that section where the one young lady she was having trouble at school, and people thought she had an emotional imbalance. There was something going on with her emotionally, and they tried many doctors, and finally they made the connection that she had been concussed months before and never was addressed. In fact, it was multiple concussion events in the same game, the same soccer game, and kept playing. I got to go out and play. I'm the captain. They push through it and try to shake off those symptoms and ignore them. And as a result, this young lady, if she would have ignored it or would have paid attention to it, taken out of the game, relaxed, got some repair and some rest, she might have been able to continue on with soccer. But because she didn't, and there was ramifications from the symptoms, she's never going to play soccer again. And no contact sports, actually, and may have some cognitive impairments. In Chapter 2 in Dr. Cantu's book, he talks about collision sports. Buzz Beisinger from the Huffington Post quotes this at the beginning of that chapter. He says, any parent who has let their child play football in the past 50 years and claimed never to have understood the risks involved was either kidding himself or an idiot. Now, let me note that Buzz mentioned the parent was a him, kidding himself. Now, I think we have to acknowledge the fact there may be moms and dads involved in the decision of a young male person playing football, but I think his point is well taken. Go into it with your eyes wide open. And for those of you who are concerned about putting your children into a sport like that, and they're anxious to play, they keep bugging you, Mom, Dad, please let me play, I love football, then do the right things within their environment, with equipment, with proper technique. You don't have to have them play at an early age if they're not ready. Now look, I speak from experience. I have a grandson, a 10-year-old grandson, who's played flag football. And contact football coaches watched him when he was 8 years old and saw what he could do in flag football and how welcoming he was to contact without any pads on, both in delivering as well as receiving. Never been trained, but remember, in flag football, there's less likelihood, even though it happens, there's less likelihood of head-to-head, head-to-neck contact. It does happen, don't get me wrong, but they wanted him. The football leagues, full contact football leagues, were recruiting him as an 8-year-old. And they did it again this year. As he's now 10, they want him to play because he's gotten bigger. He's a big boy. So my son asked, Dad, what should I do? I said, don't let him play. He's got plenty of time. If he's that talented now and he gets better and continues to like the sport, he'll be just as talented then as well. But he will have a chance to be a little boy and play, experience things. He is experiencing the game of football without pads on, but it's the same kinds of concepts. You throw it, you run, you catch, you block, but within a more controlled state. And if you wanted to go to the next level, then you can get the wonderful foam soft helmet configurations that many leagues, 7-on-7 leagues, are using, all the way up into the high school ranks to help. Because when you get to the high school ranks, there is going to be purposeful contact, even though you don't have pads on. And when I say that, I'm gonna segue. I pause a minute because I want to make sure that I put this out in really straight line context. Yes, if you put your kids into contact sports, you know you put them into a contact sport. You put your daughter into soccer, you're naive if you think there's not going to be contact, especially if they have talent to go up into the club sport area. There's going to be contact. And there could be, when one player goes up for a header, I'll bet you another player's close by. And if they're not, that game is not that competitive. So when you've got two melons going at each other, going for the ball, they may in fact meet each other before they actually touch the ball. And that is a sight I've seen before. And it doesn't sound good, let alone I'm imagining feel good with the players. But we don't have any measurement to know if that happens and one of those two players, perhaps both, but one of those two players drops down and falls and doesn't get up that quickly and then starts to show us signs that they may have been concussed. How do we know at what degree? What is the threshold of minimum that above this line starts the degree of measurement of concussion? Dr. Cantu in his book on page 65 says this: as I'm writing this book, experts in sports concussions are coming together to discuss how to set head trauma thresholds in a game, a week, and a season. We've never tried to do this before. Never circled a precise number and agreed that after a certain point, the hitting has to stop. Now, in many other sports, we have measurements. Baseball, for example. One of the simple measurements for pitchers, and it's gone up and down and it's arbitrary, but they have a measurement. 100 pitches. He hits 100 pitches, pulling him out. There are leagues at younger levels, 60 pitches, 50 pitches, whatever it is. There's a number that says in the rule book that pitcher's done. In Little League, they do it. And coaches strategically manage that in the Little League tournament, which is coming up, by the way, in August and September. Standards, concussions, brain trauma, traumatic brain injury. If we don't put things in place like that, we're going to continue to have young people spending the rest of their lives in wheelchairs. And if they're not in a wheelchair, maybe they're going to be limited in their cognitive ability. That would be a shame. That would be a shame if we continue to do that when we have the opportunity to create guidelines, measurements that put us into those guidelines to make sure it works. Now, as I say that, there are plenty of gadgets in the marketplace right now, in the environments that you're having your kids, your sons and daughters, yourself perhaps, in, and somebody comes by and says, hey, if you put this headband on, inside your helmet, inside your baseball cap, and wear it, it will help prevent head injuries. Well, I don't know about you, but I'd want a lot of data on any kind of headband that I would put inside my baseball helmet when a 90-mile-an-hour fastball seems to miss its target and heads for my helmet. Now, statistically, that doesn't happen that often, but one is enough. And I know enough baseball players to know there are some of them that I've met that it's happened to them. And then when those devices get endorsements by celebrity folks, like, for example, there is an anti-concussion aid in the form of a chin strap that was endorsed by Ndamukong Suh, and people bought it. It's not effective. It does not work. It's been proven not to work. The headbands that have been out there for soccer, they're a ripoff. They do not reduce or prevent trauma. Now, that headband may save you from getting a raspberry across your face or a ripped, contusion that draws a little bit of blood, but That doesn't mean you're not concussed, because the headband is worthless. Now, with that being said, there are some wonderful tools out there that are being applied and designed in helmet construction. But I'll come back to one of the numbers we mentioned earlier about bicycling. That was one of the top rated. In fact, it was the top rated of 20 sports in 2009 that had the greatest number, 85,000 cases reported to hospitals in the U.S., to emergency rooms. So cycling, maybe they should think about their helmets and how they're constructed, and are they actually taking care of the force. Here's what we talk about measuring thresholds. When a biker falls off a bike, and I'm sure there's many different scenarios of how you fall, but let's just pick one of them. They fall off, what amount of force, acceleration times mass, their body falling off a bike at an acceleration, hitting the ground, whether it's dirt, rock, asphalt, whatever, and creating trauma. Is the helmet they're wearing adequate to take care of that and keep them at or below the threshold? Well, we don't know what the threshold is. So it's hard to design a helmet if you don't know what the threshold is. We have research that's getting us to that point. Now we need to get the people that control the money, that run the sports, to implement those things. So that's a great segue into our last segment on performance results. Getting results that create processes. A process that I talk about a lot is equipment. Do you have in your bag what is necessary for you to compete at your highest level? Now, as I say that, I realize that I talk about and train high performance activities and strategies, as well as techniques to reduce the influence of obstacles to that performance. So if I'm talking about head trauma, should I get involved with showing and helping a bicyclist or a football player how to use their brain to think about where they're at in the field or how they tackle that, so it can minimize the chance of them being hurt in their have a brain trauma? Absolutely. That's why I'm doing the show. That's why I talk about this stuff, because there are things we can do with proper preparation and training to avoid a possible injury that could stop you from playing. It's traumatic enough you never play again. So I ask myself the question, what can I do? What performance processes can I ask players to constantly be part of that's going to help not only their whole body and mind connection, but also in particular insulate them as much as we can physically to take that amount of force that could create brain trauma? Well, one of those we talk about all the time is nutritional processes. Make sure that you have proper nutrition that gives you the energy and the cellular structure and strength to go on and think well, think properly, think sharply, respond well, so that you can execute the right technique and help you to tackle properly, help you to see the whole field on the soccer field and go after that header at a good time when you're going to make a good play, but at the same time not risk yourself banging heads with somebody else. It's one of those things where it might be better to stop to go to a header if you think you're going to collide with somebody else's head, because you can still continue to play, versus if you just blatantly disregard what you see and go ahead and clash heads with somebody, you might be out. And then now you're not an influence on the game at all, but you had a choice. So that nutritional process helps you to be properly fed, so you're thinking clearly, thinking sharply, and you can execute movement and techniques that help you get through things. Now I'm going to give you another quote of Dr. Cantu's book in chapter 7 that's titled Myths. Okay, here we go. I thought they were a football injury, a boy thing. Those guys are taught to hit hard and knock people to the ground. But anyone can get a concussion. And I don't think a lot of girls recognize that. And this comes from Hannah Staller, a soccer player at Conrad High School in West Hartford, Connecticut. And that was her quote in the New York Times. So she wasn't properly guided to understand that a girl in soccer could, in fact, get the same kind of season-ending injury that football players get. Now, I'm not saying that that coaches and moms and dads and administrators should raise this emotional red flag and concern to the point of nobody wants to participate, because there are good aspects about the sport, but there are also things about the sports that we need to do to put good processes and techniques in place so that we get performance results through those processes that are safe and they protect our kids and the players as much as they can be protected, because ultimately they all make a choice. They make a choice to play. And with that choice, as we said earlier with some of the quotes, don't be naive. Football in particular is a violent sport. Next week, we're going to have Josh Copeland on the air, and he's a MMA wrestler and fighter. And that's constant. But I know he trains very, very hard on how to be a defensive counterpuncher, which means he's dodging and weaving and moving, and he's also very good at countering punches. So yes, he's going to take some head trauma, but he also has the mindset to stay away from the sport, let it heal, because there's this fatty tissue that's called myelin that your body can actually create that helps to insulate parts of the nervous system that gets jostled around. In fact, the simplest example I can give you about that is by using my hands. So if the palm of my hand right here, or my hand, this big part of my hand, is the cell of the neuron, the soma. That's what that's called, the soma. And these are the kind of like the ganglion fibrous things that connect. Well, they connect other nerve cells. Well, where my fingertips meet, they're little teeny connections. Well, guess what? If I got hit from this side and boom, it rocks those nerve things. Well, guess what? With every action, there's an opposite equal reaction. So it goes bang like this, and it comes apart a little bit. Well, it might come apart. And imagine that's a microscopic separation. It's not literally separated like that. They still may be kind of connected, but not fully. So that means the messages going across that bridge aren't very efficient. That's where we get the concussed states we talked about earlier, the symptoms, the somatic, the cognitive, the sleep disorder kinds of things. That happens. And that's why it happens. Well, you got to give it time to come back. And you can help yourself with processes like nutritional processes, doing what the doctor says. One of the things we tell the athletes to do is don't run, because your head is moving like this, because the trauma to the nerves was caused by the brain. If it was a frontal contact, the brain goes boom to the back and then forward to the front of the skull. So you got the brain, this muscle, brain's going boom in your head and causing that injury, that separation that needs to heal. And if you get hit and you twist, like a receiver gets hit, right? Gets up in the air at the highest point, catches the ball. As he's catching the ball, he gets smacked. Let's say he's in the shoulder, and the player goes up his side and catches a little bit of his head. And that's not the worst part. That's not where he gets the cognitive injury. He gets it when he gets pushed then with that hit to the ground and falls, and his head goes boom, boom, maybe even a couple of times. The whipping action, that's what gets him a problem. And then he comes up, woozy. Well, the nerves have separated. That's what's happened. And Dr. Cantu shows very graphically what are the metabolic changes in those nerve cells. Now, they can be brought back. The myelin that insulates the sheathing around those nerve fibers is what's very, very helpful. And you can gain more back, but you've got to do it with a process that's going to be helpful. And you can prevent, the more myelin that's there, the harder you train, the more time you spend in detailing and thinking about your sport, and then executing the physical side will help you build that. Peyton Manning used to say, you can learn anything. You can teach yourself anything so that your muscles respond in the way you want. And he says that's, it's the 10,000 hour rule. Now, I don't disagree with that, but I think everybody's different. It may be 9,000 for some and 12,000 for others. You are the one that knows what's the right amount of time to bring that myelin to your nerve tissues so that it heals and protects you. Now, as I say that, and you're looking on the screens of the pictures of a severe brain trauma patient in the hospital, That's where I don't want anybody to go. But as I'm saying that, there is no guarantee that you, in some degree, will have a concussed state. If it's a high degree, you start to move into that traumatic brain injury type of thing. And remember, it's not just sports. So being aware of your environment, preparing what you do to the point where you're comfortable and confident in your execution of what you're going to do. Riding a bike, driving a car, prepare yourself, have the right equipment, know where you're going to go. Don't be surprised. Prepare for the unexpected. And yet, with that being said, you can still have fun. You can always have fun. What we've shared today with you as we get to the close of the show is that there is really no activity that you would do at a high level of performance that doesn't have a risk of some type of injury. One of the most talked about these days is brain trauma and concussion. And football seems to be the focal point, as is demonstrated in the cover picture that Dr. Cantu has on his book with football players, young football players. These look like middle school, maybe elementary, but definitely young kids playing football in his book, Concussions and Our Kids. You can find this on Amazon. It's a great book. Dr. Bob is a great champion for this. He works with the NFL to give them guidance on what they can do more. As parents, ask questions. Look at equipment. Don't be fooled by the myths of the equipment, the headbands and these things. Ask questions about how do you know that's going to prevent? How do you know that's going to give cushion? What you do know is what you can control. You can control what you eat. You can control how they train, so they're given the best training possible to execute technique that doesn't put them into harm's way. Personally, I'm very much a proponent of the 14 and under no header rule for soccer, girl or boys. I think that's an awesome rule that needs to be in place. I also believe that the surfaces, we've had one of my colleagues comes in, he talks to us about the surfaces. FIFA at the international soccer levels has a certain standard of fields that has to be put in place. It has a great amount of cushion in it. It doesn't feel funny. I mean, as far as like you're not walking or running on marshmallows, but they have the right underlayment that will give players a better feel of the field, and yet optimize their performance. They're running, they're cutting, that kind of stuff. Whereas some of the fields in the United States wouldn't come anywhere close to it. And as time goes on and water rushes over the field and takes away some of the liners they have or the fill that they use, whether it's grain fill or the plastic, the rubber particles, the black rubber part, whatever it is, gets washed away and needs to be replaced. Well, budgets are tight. So moms and dads, board members, booster club members, check out your fields where your soccer players are playing, because remember, it's not just the contact to the head. It's also when they fall on those surfaces. Well, once again, it's a Friday and it's now noon, and I'm having a great time. I'm glad that you participate with me. Thank you for being with me on Facebook. We're saying goodbye today. This is 360 Performance Talk. I'm your host, Lowell Whiteman, on KUHSdenver.com. Love being here. It's a great place to be. Thanks for showing up. Let me just break with this song, and it is Mint Condition. It's talking to you about breaking my heart. Please don't. Have a great day today. Rocky Mountain High. Well, I'm still with you on the international stuff. Have a great day today, wherever you're at in the world. Facebook, I'm going to say goodbye to you. Thanks for showing up with me today. Spread the word. 360 Performance Talk and KUHSdenver.com every Friday. Thanks. Still on there a minute. One on the left.